Welcome to Canada's most irreverent talk show. This is the Andrew Lawton Show, brought to you by True North.
Hello and welcome to you all, Canada's most irreverent talk show. This is the Andrew Lawton Show on True North on this Thursday, July 11th, the final episode of the week. But don't worry if you are going to be an Andrew Lawton withdrawal, which I don't think anyone is. In fact, I think you probably prefer, it's the old absence makes the heart grow fonder thing. But if for whatever reason you want more of me, I'll be back tomorrow with Off the Record with, actually I don't know who's on this week. I think my colleague William Macbeth is on. I believe Isaac Lamoureux as well. So either way, we'll find out tomorrow. I'll be just as surprised as you are, apparently. But anyway, hope you're having a great week so far. Oh boy, we've got a lot to get through today. We're going to be talking about the state of universities. We're going to be talking about the state of Justin Trudeau's very disastrous net zero commitments. And I also want to talk about this rather bizarre war of words that took place this morning at the Assembly of First Nations conference, including what I would call quite a slanderous and demonstrably false claim about Aaron Gunn, who's been on the show a number of times and is now a Conservative candidate. But let's start off with how there is no mercy available to those who have been shills for Justin Trudeau. So if you're to look at this government right now and find someone who is more pro-Trudeau than Trudeau even, who are you going to name? You're going to name Chrystia Freeland. This has been the most loyal foot soldier of Justin Trudeau. It's been his conciliary. It's been the reality that anytime he has been facing this internal strife, Chrystia Freeland is the one that goes out and is the Trudeau defender in any circumstance whatsoever. It's why I've never been too fearful of a Chrystia Freeland premiership, because I think that if Trudeau goes down in flames, she goes down with him, because she is so inextricably linked to the Trudeau brand. So my, where has the loyalty from the PMO been in repayment of the loyalty Chrystia Freeland has showed herself? This is from the Robert Fife, not from the Robert Fife, it's from Robert Fife. Well, it is the Robert Fife, I guess, at the Globe and Mail. PMO officials worry Freeland's economic messaging has been ineffective as party struggles. I don't know if we have a graphic of the first paragraph, but I'll read it for you anyway. Senior officials in Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's office are concerned that Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland has not been effective in delivering an upbeat economic message as the Liberal government struggles to reconnect with Canadians amid low approval ratings, sources say. Oh my, so that 20-point lead that Pierp of the Conservatives have over Justin Trudeau, it's not Trudeau's fault. The PMO is saying it's Chrystia Freeland for not giving an upbeat message about the budget to Canadians. Oh boy, it continues. There is an increasingly tense relationship. Apparently, PMO under Trudeau has centralized decision-making, has a tight grip on government messaging, and now they say that post-by-election loss, there is a need to blame Chrystia Freeland for this. Now, this is normally the type of story you'd have to take with a grain of salt. It cites unnamed sources in the PMO. Except we know that unnamed sources to the Globe and Mail are the way that the Justin Trudeau PMO likes to communicate. You may recall about 4 years ago, the very same thing happened with Bill Morneau. When the Liberals were getting ready to thrust Bill Morneau out the window to defenestrate him, as the verb goes, they started leaking all of these anti-Morneau stories about, PMO sources say this and that. And it was notable on Twitter when I looked up, I don't know if it's Sharon or Sharon, but Sharon or Sharon Kaur, who used to be Bill Morneau's chief of staff, has tweeted out a few. One of them here, I guess it was about time for the sequel. That's one of her comments. What else do we have up there? I like to think of this as a PMO summer tradition. And then there was a third one I saw. These were all in like rapid succession. I guess a playbook has been created. So a little bit sassy and snarky, but I think deservedly so, because she saw this same routine used against her former boss, Bill Morneau, and now it's being used against Chrystia Freeland. So there is a gender aspect of this that's interesting to point out, because you may recall the Liberals under Justin Trudeau have not exactly liked strong, independent women cabinet ministers for all that long. We saw Selena Caesar-Chavez, who was in caucus. We saw Jane Philpott in cabinet, Jody Wilson-Raybould in cabinet, and now perhaps Chrystia Freeland. So Chrystia Freeland has been out there just taking the slings and arrows on Trudeau's behalf, not realizing that her back was just wide open for that big, giant, shiny red knife that has sunny ways encrusted in it with diamonds. And that knife is going into her back. To mix my metaphor, she's being thrown under the bus. She's being defenestrated. She is being made the scapegoat of Justin Trudeau's failings. Now, I think there are a lot of things that we can point to with Chrystia Freeland very critically. I think her loyalty to Justin Trudeau has been one of the biggest criticisms because she's not an unintelligent person, and she has decided that she wants to stay on the sinking ship. She is the of lore, the violinist on the deck of the Titanic, willing to just keep playing as it goes down. But now they're not even giving her that chance. And it's fascinating because if you read this story further, you see that this is just PMO spin. This is a PMO leak. This is an orchestrated leak. It isn't just some rogue staffer. It's the government trying to get a message out that is making Chrystia Freeland the problem. So remember, the polling issues predated the budget. So, and the polling issues go beyond people saying, well, I don't know if there's a positive enough message on the economy of the country. Like, that is trying to simplify to the point of reductivism what the problems are plaguing this government. Now, just to put some contrast on here, I want to play a clip of Pierp speaking this morning at the AFN. Now, it wasn't entirely a rosy reception. He had some people that stood up and turned their backs to him as he was speaking, some Indigenous leaders and Indigenous chiefs, but this was the message that he gave nonetheless.
I'm not here to run your life. I don't want to run anybody's life. I want to run a small government with big citizens, free to make their own decisions and live their own lives. This is especially true for First Nations peoples. Every one of you in this room is a leader. Every one of you knows your communities better than Ottawa does, and certainly better than I do. You draw on thousands of years of experience, while Canada has only been here for a century and a half. That's why we will get the government gatekeepers, the federal government gatekeepers, out of your way so you can do what's best for your members. My promise to all Canadians is that a common sense Conservative government will axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime. This is my general commitment, but it is of particular importance to First Peoples. Axe the tax means cancelling a carbon tax that is making food and groceries more unaffordable for everyone, but especially for First Nations people. Because of the remote and colder weathers that you must confront, this tax is particularly cruel and unjust, and that is why I support the Chiefs of Ontario and their judicial review to counter this unjust tax burden. But I have good news. When I am Prime Minister, the Chiefs of Ontario will not have to spend any more money on lawyers because I will axe the tax, and when I say it, I mean it.
That is a message that is, again, not all that dissimilar. In fact, it's pretty much identical to the message he gives when he's speaking to non-Indigenous people, but he's giving it an applicability to them. He's talking about why it matters to them more. And did he win over everyone in the room? No, but he did at a couple of points get applause during his speech. When, again, the relationship between the Conservatives and Indigenous groups has not always been a positive one, politically speaking. So there is, I think, a great contrast. When you say that, oh, well, the problem that the Conservatives have, or the problem that the Liberals have relative to the Conservatives, is that Chrystia Freeland didn't give a positive enough economic message. It's the Liberals not realizing that they are fundamentally not offering what right now their most viable alternative is, which is a hopeful message, a clear message, and one that people are willing to embrace and willing to adopt. Now, this is, again, a tremendous, tremendous failing on the part of the Liberals to have Justin Trudeau look in the mirror and realize that he is not offering that. People do not believe him. He's trying to point around and blame every single person in the room but himself, including Chrystia Freeland. Blame everyone in the room but himself for his party and him being so unpopular. And again, the Liberal NDP coalition on this is remarkably similar. Jagmeet Singh, who is the leader of the NDP, but basically he's like the deputy Liberal prime minister at this point, he just went off on the Conservatives using his opportunity to speak to First Nations people, not to provide a positive message, a hopeful message, but just to crap on the party that he believes is so evil and dastardly. This was what he said.
He talks a lot about freedom. But what he really wants is freedom for himself. For him, when he says freedom, freedom means not respecting treaty obligations. For him, freedom means not respecting your rights. For him, freedom means not getting your free, prior, and informed consent. After all, he's the guy that said Indigenous people need a stronger work ethic, not compensation for the atrocities committed in residential schools. All right? He's a guy that said that chiefs like you have too much power. That's literally what he said. He's a guy who speaks to anti-Indigenous organizations very recently, not years ago, but very recently, denying the truth of residential schools. He's a guy who right now has let a very well-known residential school denier, Aaron Gunn, run for his party. That's who he really is. When someone shows you who they are, you got to believe them, especially when they show you again and again and again.
Now, Jennifer L., who's an Indigenous woman herself and very active politically, I think she leans right, but she's certainly not a dyed-in-the-wool partisan by any stretch. I've seen her make criticisms of the Conservatives and of other parties. She had an analysis on X that I wanted to share a little bit of, in which she talks about Jagmeet Singh, who she says is very popular among Indigenous leaders generally. But she says Jagmeet emphasized a lot on listening and started off good, then got lost in the weeds complaining about Pierre. Dunks are okay, but it was too much, and noticeably he sounded desperate. And again, I think the desperation is clear with that sideswipe against Aaron Gunn. Now, Aaron's been on the show in the past. Jagmeet Singh called him a residential school denier. A residential school denier, and used that as a dunk in some way on Pierre Poilievre. Now, the thing is, and I'll read a statement that I got from the Conservatives on this. Once again, Jagmeet Singh is fabricating stories and trying to distract Canadians from his own track record of abandoning hardworking Canadians and propping up a Liberal government that has continued to leave First Nations on the sidelines. Aaron Gunn has been clear in recognizing the truly horrific events that transpired in residential schools, and any attempt to suggest otherwise is simply false. Gunn is looking to join Pierre Poilievre in repealing Trudeau's radical anti-resource laws to quickly greenlight good projects so First Nations and all Canadians bring home more powerful paychecks. Now, by the way, I don't even know the claim, the source of the claim. One of our reporters is looking into it now, and he's going to ask the NDP to show their work on this. The only thing that I could think remotely he could be talking about is Aaron Gunn saying that Canada is not a genocidal nation. And if that makes you a residential school denier, my goodness, you'd have to lock up the majority of the country, because most people who live in this country, who are proud of this country, believe that Canada is not a genocidal nation. And if you did, you'd be recommending all of our leaders go up before the Hague, which is not what's happening. So Aaron Gunn, who gets criticized for saying, hey, he's proud to be Canadian, is now called a residential school denier by Jagmeet Singh. By the way, Jagmeet Singh, who is propping up the Liberal government that accused itself of genocide. So that means that he is propping up a genocidal government. What does that say about him? What does that say about Jagmeet Singh? That he is literally the lone political entity keeping a government that has confessed to perpetrating genocide against Indigenous people in power. Why is he not facing criticism for that? My goodness. Well, this is the sort of bend over backwards wokeness that we see transpiring across the country, not just in the political class, but also in academic institutions. We spoke a little bit earlier on in the week with a gentleman who was looking at just diversity hiring and why no one is providing any evidence. The problem goes much deeper than that. As in a piece from The Hub this week by Professor Zachary Patterson, there is a far left, or he says extremist left ideology supplanting core curricula and infusing every aspect of academia. Now, it sounds a bit defeatist, but he says, no, it can be saved. The piece in The Hub, Canada must reclaim its wayward universities. Here's how, written by Concordia University professor Zachary Patterson. Zach, it's good to have you on the show. Thanks for coming on today.
Thanks very much for having me, Andrew.
Now, Zach and I were hanging out back at the ARC Forum in London a few months back that Jordan Peterson had hosted, the ARC Forum. We had a great time doing it. I think it was in Ottawa. I saw you more recently here. But you offer the rare hopeful message for heterodox people about academia right now. And I wanted to have you on. What's the first step to fixing this?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not sure I would give you a first step. The article itself was trying to give a sense of the lay of the land of the possibilities of what's available to policymakers in the domain of universities in Canada. So it looks at federally, provincially, university level, and so I'll just give you that for now, Andrew. Maybe you have other questions.
Well, let me start with the free speech aspect alone, because there was this flurry of discussion a few years ago. You had Ontario notably come out during the 2018 election and say, we're going to mandate free speech at universities. Every university is going to have a statement of academic principles affirming its support for academic freedom. And what happens? Every university comes out with a statement and nothing else changes. So the problem there is that you can have people that want to do the right thing or want to say they're doing the right thing, but it doesn't translate down to administrations that are still doing the same things that are, I would say, censoring heterodox opinions. We've seen the utter contrast post October 7th when you can't say that a woman is a biological human female, but you can say death to the Jews on campus.
Right. So there's a couple of things there, Andrew. The first is so these laws that were put in place, the Quebec government did, Alberta as well, asking universities to commit to free speech and academic freedom and those types of things. The issue around those is that typically what happens, and what has happened in both those cases, is that universities are left, first of all, to come up with their own policies, sometimes even to come up with their own definitions, and also obviously to enforce those things. So there's a kind of a conflict of interest there. And so often what happens is the wording that you get in from the universities is it's often referred to as I'm all for academic freedom, but. And so there are lots of different things that can intervene there. If it's a harmful speech, if it's hateful, if it makes some people feel bad, and so that's one of the downsides of that. I've forgotten the second thing I wanted to say about academic freedom.
So explain then what you think the policy tools could be that would have some more teeth.
Okay, so this comes back to the previous point. One of the things is that not having a mechanism to make sure that academic freedom is enforceable or enforced is a problem. So the universities have to do it themselves. What's happened in the United Kingdom is they have the Higher Education Academic Freedom Act, I think it's called. They have kind of an academic freedom czar. So universities are supposed to respect academic freedom. And if they don't, then people at the university can reach out to this czar, and it's an ombudsperson of sorts, and they can evaluate what happened. And if there are extreme problems with it, the universities themselves can be fined. So I think this is something that's probably necessary if we want to take something like academic freedom seriously. And that's that's one important pillar of this type of approach. And then after that, there's many different interventions that can happen, like I say, either at the provincial or the federal, or even at the university level.
One of the most severe things that a government could do, and again, we've heard people talk about doing this, but we've never seen it put into action in Canada, is defunding them. These are by and large public institutions, certainly the ones where I'd say government has an ability to do anything at all. It would be the public institutions, and they rely on government for a huge amount of money, federal and provincial, but predominantly provincial. And there's nothing stopping a premier from saying, if you do not support academic freedom, your funding is gone. How responsive do you think universities would be to that?
I think they'd be pretty responsive to it, Andrew. Like you say, it's in the column, and I talk about these different types of approaches. These are what I call incentive-based approaches. So basically, respect for academic freedom and what I call the foundational principles of the university, and those are contingent upon all kinds of different funding streams. So there's direct funding, there's funding from the funding agencies, there's being able to get student loans for tuition for universities contingent upon their respecting these things.
And there are some that are a little bit more, I don't want to say subtler, but there are some that are less heavy-handed. You mentioned the, more incentive-based approaches. I don't know if they would be as responsive to that. The reason I say that is because a lot of these are institutions that seem to be very ideological, and you have to navigate this on your own through your work at Concordia, but I know you've also been involved with a group that I'm a member of, the Society for Academic Freedom and Scholarship. You've heard from your colleagues. And administrators, because there's a fear that administrators could be just fearful of the woke mob. But I think I'm increasingly of the mind, and I'm curious for your thoughts on this, that administrators are part of it. The administrators actually believe what they're doing.
So evidence suggests that that administrators are more ideological even than the rank and file professors, from what I understand. And so one of the things that I talk about in the piece also is provincial governments have a series of different responsibilities towards universities. They decide how the charters or how the universities are founded, and as well as how they're governed. And there are things like being able to appoint boards of directors, members of boards of directors, and so they can have a role at that level, which might have an influence on the political suasion of the people who are in charge, the administrators.
So let's go to the question that unfortunately tends to put a sour note on these sorts of discussions, but you may take us in a different direction. Are you an optimist that this can and will be fixed, that this can and will be addressed?
Well, I think we have to try, and I think it's the obligation basically of governments to take this very seriously. Like you mentioned before, universities in Canada particularly are almost exclusively privately funded. When you're doing research for these series of columns, I discovered that higher education receives 30% more funding than the Department of National Defense, or of national defense in general. So there's a lot of money that's going to the universities. And there also seems to be a big difference between what it is that universities want to be doing and what the public thinks about what they want to be doing. If you look at issues like affirmative action, decolonization, all these types of things, a recent report came out from Eric Kaufman looking at the degree to which the public was in favor of these approaches and policies, and for the most part, a large majority is not. So basically, there's a lot of money coming from the public purse going to universities that are supporting policies or causes, maybe if you want, that aren't endorsed by the public itself.
Of the provinces you look at, I think Ontario, Alberta, and Quebec were the three. Has one had any more success than the others, would you say?
I think it's hard to say. Quebec's was a bit more, it was stronger because they actually provided a definition of academic freedom in a way that the other provinces didn't. And so they asked the universities themselves to, come up with their own. I think Alberta might have had something about the Chicago principles. But,
I think Ontario did as well, but again, Ontario, they put the policy in place and then they never looked at it again. And like universities, some of them didn't even really do it.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't think we have a choice if someone doesn't have a choice, those who are responsible for it don't have a choice but to try to do something. I don't know how hopeful I am, but I like to try to see the bright side of things.
You touched on another aspect of this, and I wanted to visit this with you because we dealt with this last week with Kaylin Ford, who's the head of the Alberta Classical Academy in, Alberta. And you had said that one possible, not a fix, but a mechanism that could be deployed is eliminating the monopoly that university education faculties have on licensing teachers. Because a lot of the wokeness we see in education is happening far before students get to university or college. It's happening with students in their K-12 education. And all of the teachers are coming from a select handful of education faculties. And what's interesting in that is that I had never, and I said this to Kaylin, I had never really in my life thought that there could be a different way. And then as I got older and started learning about this, I realized, well, yeah, why should you need to have an education degree to be a teacher when you could be a subject matter expert and you could be qualified that way? So why would that help in your view?
Well, I mean, mostly it's because from what my understanding of the education schools is that they really are purveyors and influenced by these ideologies, and they have been for a long time, since the 1960s. And it was kind of, they were the first departments to undergo the sway of these ideologies. And so they've been there for a long time. They've had a lot of influence, and of course they have influences on the teachers, and the teachers are teaching the students. And I see it, with my own children. And so I think if there was some way to break that monopoly, people who had masters or PhDs, like you say, subject experts, maybe they could just go around that, and that there would be less power that was invested in the education schools or departments to be able to push an agenda.
All right. The piece in question in the Hub, Canada must reclaim its wayward universities. Here's how. Not quite a roadmap, but a whole menu of the options. And I think the first step is diagnosing, which you've done quite well. Professor Zachary Patterson, always good to see you. Thanks for coming on today.
Thanks very much, Andrew. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you. And again, we're going around the world here. We're covering everything. We're covering education. We're covering Indigenous issues. We're talking about Jagmeet Singh. We're doing it all. But we have to cap things off with a look at one of the most profound examples of virtue signaling by the state, of putting this lofty ideological goal ahead of anything resembling science or facts or evidence. And that is the commitment to what is increasingly becoming a very dangerous net zero goal. Now, this is not being a quote-unquote climate denier. It's certainly not from being anti-science. It's about looking at the facts. We have had a couple of major international agreements that have dealt with fossil fuel use and emissions. We had Kyoto back in 1997. We had the Paris Accord back in 2015. Since both of those, we've seen fossil fuel consumption go up. We've seen emissions go up. The entry into a carbon tax by Canada that has continued to increase has not stopped emissions from increasing. And we're wondering, if you've been naive and just expected that government knew what it was doing, you've probably been wondering why. Well, the reality is that this is just not working. And what we have from our friend Kenneth Green, who has written a piece in the Toronto Sun about this, is a call on the government to abandon what is increasingly an unfeasible and damaging net zero plan. This has not worked. It's requiring a massive phase out of fossil fuels without an alternative. And that is the so critical part of this. Dr. Kenneth Green joins us once again. Always good to see you, Ken. Thanks for coming on today.
Always good to be with you, Andrew.
So this number has just become so arbitrary. We have to reduce by 2050. They'll occasionally say 2040. We have to go net zero here. We've got to reduce emissions by this amount. And none of it really matters in a way, because they're not doing any of it. We're not seeing any record here. But the policy mechanisms that are supposed to get us there are causing some real harms, are they not?
Yes, they are. And another one of the arbitrary targets we have is the 1.5 degrees C, limiting warming to 1.5 degrees C, which actually drives all of the other ones beneath it. The regulations on the energy sector are actually causing significant economic harm in Canada and also in the United States and around the world, because energy is intrinsic to producing economic growth and economic productivity, and it's economic productivity and growth that lead to prosperous and thriving societies. And so these regulations, which are increasing the cost of energy to manufacturers, to producers, to consumers, to homeowners, are all basically causing economic suppression and therefore lowering people's quality of life. In some cases, the regulations themselves are also leading to environmental harm separate from climate change, for example. So with plastics regulations, Canada has a goal of phasing out, reaching zero plastic waste by 2030. The studies show that the substitutes people are using for plastics are actually causing more harm to the environment. They generate more amounts of waste that have to be managed, and they pose health risks to people different than plastics do. So the regulatory, the crusade or jihad for net zero 2050 is leaving a considerable amount of damage in its wake.
And the one thing that I find so fascinating about this is that no one is talking about energy. I shouldn't say no one, you are, but no one in the government is talking about energy demands. We have a lot of very ambitious goals, even if we go all in on electric vehicles, and this will require energy. And I've yet to see anyone even so much as have a discussion about where that's going to come from. Even when people talk about renewables, it's all very theoretical. They have not actually provided a roadmap of matching energy needs, which will only increase, but even at the current level, with alternative energy.
Well, energy needs are huge, not only in Canada and the United States, but around the world, and especially in developing countries that are still using wood and dung for cooking fires and things. And so the global energy demand is massive, and it will only expand with population, with global population. But the question you ask is a really valid one, which is how are we going to match the demand with supply? And this is an area where governments, I believe, especially what governments who are in the Western governments and those who are in the net zero school of thought and the climate are concerned about, basically have climate change as their center of their existence. This is where I believe they're actually mostly insincere, because they actually don't intend to supply the demand. So they promise, but they don't intend to deliver. And historically, that's what has happened, which is they promise you an alternative or a better version. It's not that we don't want you to have energy. We want you to generate it with this way, wind or solar instead of fossil fuels. It's not that we don't want you to have your refrigerator. We want you to have this super hyper efficient refrigerator. It's not that we don't want you to have a barbecue, but it has to be an electric barbecue. But the thing is, they just never, when the time comes for them to give you that alternative, the electric car that matches your vehicle, you don't get it. They don't give it to you, and the prices never come down to match the pre-existing competitive sources. So these things just don't manifest, and I think that's actually a goal, which is they want to actually reduce humans' access to energy because they want to control people more rigidly and have them do less things. They don't want you flying around in airplanes. That's not for the commoners. That's for the elites. They don't want you living in sprawling bigger houses or independent houses or even individual houses. They want to constrain people's behavior and constrict humanity because of that is their philosophy, is that human activity is detrimental to the world, is killing the world.
The other thing you have to look at as well is, I think, the moving goalposts on this. And the goalposts have not just moved on the target and on when, but even whenever the UN COP summits on this come up, you'll always have these radical groups that will say, no, net zero isn't good. We need absolute zero. So they're actually against things that industry can do to mitigate emissions. They're against things like carbon capture. They're against carbon, all of these alternatives. And when you hear people talk about absolute zero, and again, it's not just fringe people, it's some legitimate people, they actually are anti-industry. I mean, they're anti-human. They want us to all just be sitting in dark rooms alone, and that is the goal. And that's why whenever you hear, occasional proposals from some city council in, Quebec, say, to ban wood stoves, I mean, that's actually quite revealing about the state of contempt they have for Western 21st century life.
It's not even Western 21st century life. It's the life since the humans harnessed fire and learned how to cook their food. Humans need energy and use energy to transform things into the substances that keep them alive, materials and things that keep them alive. And so, the goalposts shift constantly. That's something that, of course, is well known, and of course all the subsidiary goals shift as well, which is, no, it's not enough for the West to give the developing countries $1 billion a year. Now they have to give them $1 trillion a year. Now they have to give them $2 trillion a year in order to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. It is a never-ending shifting goalpost, and it has been since Kyoto in 1997. But again, of course, we're seeing some of that here at home as well, which is, back over the last 20 years, it was you have to phase out coal. We want you to phase out coal, and you can use natural gas. And now the new call is no natural gas either, just wind and solar. And when the wind and solar, if that would ever happen, it was all wind and solar, then they would no doubt find a way to say, well, yeah, but no wind, because windmills are killing birds, and it is a ratchet to zero. It's a ratchet to extremism, and it is in fact a rejection of the idea of human nature as being an empowered species, humanity as being an empowered species that can change the world by the use of energy and materials. It's a fundamental rejection of the acceptability of having human beings on your planet.
Now, I'm from Ontario, so obviously my experience is different than it is for other people, because we have an Ontario hydroelectric. We also have nuclear, but nuclear is probably the greatest way to expose the utter hypocrisy from a lot of the emissions hawks, because these people that want low emission energy sources, you bring up nuclear, and all of a sudden, no, not like that.
Absolutely. That's what I say is you can recognize their actual goals by what they do, which is the rejection of nuclear power, which was known, of course, as a very low greenhouse gas emitting activity, and it has been safely used for 60 years, or actually 80 years, maybe. The rejection of nuclear power, absolute rejection and continued rejection of it, does show their complete and utter insincerity about the reality of what they want to achieve. They don't want to achieve greenhouse gas emission reductions at the least cost while still maintaining humanity's energy profile. And they have rejected that every single time in favor of socialist measures that control and redistribute wealth. That's the other thing, which is you don't get to reward too many cronies if you're really relying on nuclear power, and you don't get to play the subsidy game very much because nuclear power doesn't require a lot of subsidies.
Yeah, and I mean, it's low cost as well. It's not, it's accessible. I mean, obviously there's a significant upstart cost, but yeah. And the one thing I guess I'll say on this is that when you see electricity shortages in Alberta, when you see other things like this, it forces people to realize that some of these discussions are a bit of a luxury item, and that when people are living through some minus 40-degree winter, it forces them to realize that, okay, maybe I don't want to just shut things down entirely. So I do think that for the non-activist, there is a bit of a realization coming that some of these things are just infeasible.
I think that's true. That's true. I think for the non-activists, for the non-committed believers, I think people are looking at the effects of the climate policies on their wallet, on their house, on their wallet, on their safety, in their cars and in their houses, and against the climate, basically safety from fires, safety from storms, and they're seeing that these climate policies are not desirable and not giving them anything of benefit. They're not giving them a benefit, but they're certainly imposing a cost that people are increasingly seeing taking a bite out of their paycheck every month. And I think there's a loss of appetite for these extreme plans, not only in Canada but also around the world, where some governments that are shifting right are vowing to move away from net zero at 2050, much less not go to absolute zero. No one is ever going to absolute zero carbon emissions because it's impossible. But I think there is a waning of enthusiasm for this. In polls, climate change doesn't come up very highly compared to other people's other needs for what they think is important, such as affordable housing, good education, healthcare. I think climate has never polled very well amongst the normal people who are not activists, which is, I think, why we have actually seen the activists held down in terms of their ambition, the scope of their ambitions, for so many years, since 1997, to impose draconian regulations, draconian taxes, draconian limitations on energy use, bans on fossil fuels and things like that, because people are not buying the extreme rhetoric. They look out the window. That's the thing, right? As one of my former colleagues, or a former climatologist, used to say, don't look away from the weather report on your phone and look out the window. And does the world look like it's being destroyed? And so are you seeing the disasters that you're hearing about constantly? All of the wildfires, floods, and droughts. Is that happening near you? And people are looking at it going, I'm just not seeing it. The air is cleaner than it's ever been before. In Canada and the U.S. in terms of normal pollutants and conventional pollution. There's quality of life is good, safety is high. So, I think people are losing enthusiasm for these issues, and it's only a matter of time until that's reflected in the vote.
I always like when the delegate for the Maldives at the UN Climate Summit will say, we're going to be underwater any minute now. And then you look and realize that the Maldives has opened like 30 beachfront resorts in the last year. And you're saying, well, you're not behaving like a country that's drowning.
Yeah, they're actually growing in landmass. That's one of the things that was the funniest things of all about the climate change and the low-lying islands thing, is that it turns out when sea levels come up, the islands grow because they're actually partly live ecosystems. And so a lot of these islands that were supposed to be underwater by now have actually expanded in their land area. And the coral reefs, of course, are which were supposed to be dead 20 years ago and dead and extinct 20 years ago, are just exploding with vigor. So Australia, which was saying we're going to lose our economy because we're going to lose our coral reefs, it's not happening, and they're not behaving as if they think it's going to happen.
Yeah. Oh, it's the same. You get the fear mongering about polar bears in the north when their population's thriving. So, well, it's a great piece in the Toronto Sun. Dr. Kenneth Green, senior fellow at the Fraser Institute. Always a pleasure, sir. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, Andrew. You too. Take care.
All right. Thanks a lot, Ken. That does it for us for today. We'll be back. Maybe we need to do, okay, here's what we got to do. I got to get the True North leadership team on board with this. We'll do a fact-finding exploration to the Maldives. If you want to send me to the Maldives, it could take like 2, 3, 4 weeks. You let me know. It's going to be expensive, but it's in the name of science. So Sean, do you want to come to the Maldives? We'll do some real investigating there. I'll do a show every day, and I'll basically point at the water, and we'll see if it's moving. And I might actually need to stay in the water all day just to see if it rises, and if I'm drowning by the end of the day, then we'll believe. But yeah, I'll do it for a few weeks. All right, Sean, you're on board. My wife might need to come as well. This is it. All right. True North, we'll set up a domain name. Send True North to the Maldives.com in the name of science. All right. I've had my fun for the day. I'll have to do the Mayor Quimby backdrop if I just decide to go there anyway and pretend I'm not there from Simpsons. There's a reference for you. Anyway, have a great weekend, everyone. We will see you on Monday with more of Canada's most irreverent talk show here on True North. Thank you. God bless and good day to you all.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.